and welcome to Westside Regional Center Education Support Services Transition Planning for High School Students in Special Education. It's very important that you're finally here at high school. Next. It's very important that we're finally here at high school. And there's a lot going on in high school, not only just for your education and core curriculum and alternative curriculum, but you're preparing for life. You're preparing for your life after high school, which many adolescents are focusing so much going on in high school, you really forget that this is all about life after high school. So we're going to be talking about some tools and some small steps you can take at each grade level to prepare for your post-high school transition. Next. So one of the things, several things we'll be talking about, you'll be hearing a lot of icons and letters. One of the main frameworks that we'll be discussing and that your student in special education has been having part of their process is called an IEP, an Individual Education Program. And this is where you list goals and objectives that you want the student identified by assessments that the student will learn and complete. And you'll build on each of that level of IEPs goals once they're completed. The new IEP will express the next goal to learn after you've met those goals. The important part, the IEP is important, but for high school, the important part is the individual transition plan. And that's specifically talking about what is the student going to do after high school and how to prepare them. There's a particular set of assessments that are done, transition assessments that are done to help plan for what the ITP and IEP should focus on. The other thing we'll be talking about is what are the high school completion options? What are the number of credits? What are the minimum classes? What does a core curriculum look like as opposed to alternative curriculum? Or the core curriculum, you get a diploma, and on the alternative curriculum, you receive a certificate of completion. The certificate of completion, many students that are on that alternative track stay in school until age 22. So, and some students with the diploma exit at age 17 or 18. So we'll talk about both of those scenarios. The other thing that we'll explain is the Department of Rehabilitation, or DOR. This is a counseling service that will be helpful for job training and helping you find jobs and support on the job. So that's the Department of Rehab. Next. So the IEP is a written statement of an educational program designed to meet each student's unique and individual needs. Every student who receives special education services must have an IEP. An IEP can actually start from preschool if that's the level of need that's been determined, or it can start at grammar school, or it can start at high school. But the IEP is the framework. It's based on the Individuals with Disability Education Act. It's a federal law. It came into place in 1975. We're very, very fortunate here in the United States that we have this opportunity to give specialized instruction to students that have special needs. That's the IEP, Individual Education Program Plan. That's the framework. And then for transition planning for post-secondary or post-high school education, we focus on the individual transition plan. And that transition is, what are we doing to leave school? Next. So again, we create measurable goals. They have to be realistic and they have to be met in a year. If they're written down in the IEP on the document and the document is signed, if the goals are and there are services required for the goals, for example, speech services or occupational therapy services, and those services aren't being provided, there is a compliance mechanism that you can do to make sure that the support is received if it's assigned IEP. So it lists those services, it lists the goals, and it lists the place where the student will be going to school and who will be providing the services. So it's a very important document. And it's really important that you learn how and organize the documents. So you would want to get a 3-ring binder. You would want to organize them by assessments and by IEP documents and by year. So we probably sound like broken records talking about this all the time. But if you wanted to get some help with your IEP, if you had everything organized, it will be a much easier process. Otherwise, if you're missing documents, we might have to get them from the school, which could be a delay. So let's start now keeping our IEP information together by year in your 3-ring binder. Next. So we're talking about the transition plan. What is a transition plan? When a student turns 16, the team will begin to develop this transition plan. It's part of the goals of the IEP, and it identifies goals and objectives to prepare the adolescent from who will be transitioning from school to adult life based on their interest and needs. So there's assessments that happen, transition assessments that happen based on individuals' needs. There's transitions that happen that help define what the individual's needs and strengths are. And then from there, we write the goals to help address the needs and help to build proficiency and document the services. So the transition ITP should certainly contain information and training and experiences about community participation, what we call community-based instruction, and looking at what the individual will do after graduation. Are we going to explore employment? Are we going to explore post-secondary education? And strategies on depending what path is taken on how to realize that. Next. So the ITP, and we talked about the Individuals with Education Act. This is the framework for special education, and the document that's generated is the IEP for school, high school 16 and older. In addition to the IEP, an ITP is developed and must include post-secondary goals that are measurable and are based upon age appropriate transition assessments. We don't want to use an assessment from a student that was at 13 to develop a transition plan for the student that's 16 or 18. So the assessments need to be done in a timely manner. And also, we need to be considerate of the timeline for assessments. Assessments take 60 days to complete once the parent or the individual signs the consent to assess. So at 60 days, you'll be sitting down at an IEP meeting, which will review the assessment, develop goals and objectives from the assessment, and develop a transition plan from the assessment. So it's a time-consuming process, and you want to make sure you do it with plenty of time. This is not something you wait till the last month of school. It has to be done within that in the early part of the last semester upon the student exiting. So next, ITP. This means the IEP team must create measurable goals for a student that are focused on life after high school and specify what services are needed to help the student reach the goals. That's an important piece, is to look at the services. Oftentimes we're in meetings and they'll write the goals, but they won't provide the support services for the student to meet the goals. So that's something that's very critical. So it's not only goals, but it's also looking at services. Services in the ITP or IEP document are usually at the end of the document, and they're contained in something called a FAPE offer, free and appropriate public education, where it lists, after the goals are listed, it will list what services and how often and the frequency and the duration and how long these services will be in order to assist the student in meeting the goals. So the transition, and for some students, the transition planning can be kind of complex. So you can have an IEP meeting that does the education goals and the services, and then you can have another meeting specifically to talk about transition planning. And because it's a different framework. It's very hard to sit down at a 4-hour meeting these days. So sometimes you get the IEP piece together and then you meet and do the ITP, the individual transition plan, at a different time. Or if you're really well organized and prepared, you can do it all together. But I know I'm a parent and I know that sometimes, after a 4-hour meeting, my brain just sort of shuts off. So that might be true for you as well. Okay, next. High school completion options. So one of the most important decisions you're going to make, are you going to be on that diploma track where you have to meet the credit requirement and take all the classes required by the State Department of Ed, and Fabian will go in much more detail about what those are. That's called the core curriculum. The other curriculum is called the alternative curriculum, and that is for students that might not be able to do the academics around biology and chemistry and algebra. So that we can be on another track called the alternative curriculum track, and these focus on functional skills, community skills, work preparation, and that is determined what schedule, what option you're on. If you're on the alternative option or you're on the core option, is determined by an assessment process. And I talked a little bit about that, but we have other trainings on IEP and assessment process. So the assessment, which is a 60-day timeline, which you're sitting down to talk about the outcome of the assessment. At that time, you talk about what path your student is going to take. Is it going to be the core curriculum path, or is it going to be an alternative curriculum path? And the programs look different depending on what district, or if you're a charter school that the student belongs to. Next. The core curriculum, and this is something that Fabian will explain in more detail. Thank you.
Barb briefly mentioned, there's two pathways in completing high school, and the first one is core curriculum. That allows a student to come out of high school with their high school diploma. Next. This is the path that that everybody takes in high school that doesn't have any disability. The rules apply almost similarly for our students with disabilities. So the core curriculum expects students to be able to fulfill their requirements to be able to get the high school diploma before they leave high school. So they must take the requirements that the state set up, set us, set out for the high school diploma graduation requirements, as well as what their districts, individual districts require. This diploma would allow students to have employment, to join the Army if that's what they're interested in, to go to college, be able to go to 4-year college or 2-year college, or trade school, be able to get financial aid, federal aid in terms of grants or loans. The course of study is really core curriculum, meaning that unmodified curriculum that is given to all students. The student must show that they are able to access this core curriculum to be able to be in this, be able to get the high school diploma. This include math, science, English, social studies, physical education requirement, and some electives. Next. So each state has their set up their own minimum requirement. These are minimum requirements that a student is allowed to complete to be able to graduate with a diploma in that state. However, local districts are able to create their own requirements. So a lot of the districts that we work with have additional requirements, to ensure that their students complete before they exit out high school with their diploma. So you have to make sure that you check in with your local district to see what the requirements are for your specific school district. Next. So the minimum requirement for the state of California is 3 courses of English, 2 courses of math, that includes Algebra 1, 2 courses of science, including biological and physical science. Next. 3 courses of social studies. This includes US history, geography, world history, and classes like that. And 1 course of virtual performing arts or foreign language. Sign language can be substituted for foreign language, so you must have that conversation with your child's IEP team. Next. In addition to that, 2 courses of physical education, PE, can be APE, depending on the child's needs. Adaptive PE can replace physical education, so that's something that you also need to have that conversation with your IEP team. Next. For the core curriculum, for the student to be able to graduate with a high school diploma, all students must meet these requirements. At the very minimum, they have to meet the minimum state requirements. Algebra 1 is a graduation requirement, but in some cases, our students have really difficulty completing Algebra 1. In those cases, there are things that we can do to waive Algebra 1 as a graduation requirement. So if your students having difficulty completing Algebra 1, that's a conversation you should have with your IEP team to see how to best resolve this. Next. So in some instances that we have students that are able to access the core curriculum. However, they are able to do it in a very slower pace. So doing it the traditional way may not be an option because they would not meet the time requirements. So other options to look at for these students would be possibly requesting a 5th year of high school. If a child is only a few credits short to meet the minimum requirement or the requirement from the LEA, we can request for 1 more year to for the child to be able to complete it. In some cases, if a child is only like 1 class or 2 classes short, they should be able to walk with their peers and graduate on time and be able to use the summer after the graduation to complete those courses. They would not be allowed to get the diploma until they complete their required courses. Another route that we can take is doing the minimum state requirements. A child is going to be able to have their diploma completing with the minimum state requirements. However, some districts do not allow that. They have their own requirements and they are allowed to have their own requirements. So you must check with your child's school district to be able to see if that's a possible way. If the child's school district does not allow that, the child may be able to do that after high school and still complete the high school diploma requirements after high school. Another one is GED. That's another thing that we can pursue. A lot of our local libraries are able to provide that. So that's something that we can talk about at the child's IEP with the IEP team to discuss what's the best route for the child. Next. The typical graduation age of 18. However, some students are able to complete their courses early, so they can graduate at the age of 17 or younger. Or some students are they need to stay a little longer, so the age of 19 is an acceptable graduating age also. Next. So we have to make sure that we keep in mind the IEP process is only exists in grades from 0 to grades from preschool to 12th grade for the core curriculum students. When the students exit out of high school with their diploma, they no longer qualify for IEP. The educational relationship with the local school district stops there. So if a child is pursuing a higher education post-graduation from high school, the rules are different in terms of what is available for them at the higher education or at the college. Disable student services are the centers that provide students with services and accommodations. So if the child is looking to go to college, it's very important that you familiarize with the specific disabled student services at the college your child is looking to enroll, and get to know the services that are available. In addition to that, in addition to accommodations for education, colleges are also obligated to offer students with disabilities equal opportunity for housing and other services. They have to make sure that what the services that they're offering are non-discriminatory and are able are allowing their students with disabilities access their education appropriately. Next.
All right, so thank you, Fabian. Now we'll be talking about the alternative curriculum. This alternative curriculum is for students that are not on the diploma track. So they have some different type of learning needs, and we'll talk more about that specifically next. So the alternative curriculum is based on a certificate of completion. So a certificate of completion means you've met the requirements, But we're looking at some education requirements in some of the units, but we're looking at a different way of educating students, because students on the alternative curriculum or certificate of completion wouldn't necessarily have the capacity to do algebra and biology and the other chemistry, the other sciences required for the diploma. So the certificate of completion is based on what we call the functional skills. So looking at math and language art and speaking. So one of the ways we look at math in a functional way is to, for example, go shopping, go grocery shopping. What does the list look like? How much is it going to cost and not even going to cost? When you're ready for checkout, do you have the money that you need to buy the items? So it's more of using your education and learning these skills in a functional context. We also want to focus on independent living, and that is, grooming, hygiene, personal safety, life skills. So that's also taught as part of the alternative curriculum for the certificate of completion. The other thing we want to start in high school for students on the alternative curriculum is actual vocational skills, doing career exploration, doing assessments. What do you see yourself doing for a job? Some of our students haven't even thought about that piece. What do I do after high school? Everything's usually so much focused on high school and peers and homework that we don't really realize that we're doing this all to be able to have a job and a life after high school. So that's something that the alternative curriculum works on, different type of assessments to help the individual understand their strengths, what needs they have, and then these assessments inform the team on what particular goals we should start working on. And also what is appropriate community access skills or community behavior. For a lot of our folks, they need to do, for example, transportation training, taking the bus, learning how to read a schedule. They need to access the community resources like the service supermarket and libraries and recreation and leisure opportunities, and how to communicate this. Some of our students are nonverbal, and then we have other methods of communicating, either using sign language or icon board or PECS system. So there are all these ways that we can learn in a functional context under the alternative curriculum. Next. So the graduation status, that's one thing that's pretty different for the students on the alternative curriculum, is how they usually stay in school till age 22. And those last couple of years that they're in is specifically focused around preparing for that transition. It should be looking at opportunities actually in the community. The transition teacher, it's usually a transition teacher at this age, would actually be taking students to the market to practice these functional skills, or using public transportation. So a lot of the information and a lot of skill building that they're doing is based on the community, in the community. Yes, they will be doing uh, opportunities and learning in schools, but a good transition program will also have opportunities in the community. Some schools do it that they do half the day as on campus, and the other half of the day is in the community. Some other schools do it that they 2 days a week, they start their day once they do roll call and everything, being in the community. The teacher provides the job coaching at the employment site. Typically, some high schools will have developed relationships with different businesses in the community, that they have done some prep work to understand that these are the students, why they're here and why we're practicing, because they need to prepare for being able to work and live in the community. Next. So some of the things to think about ahead of time is if you're an English learner, you would want to give the district a lot of time to make sure that there's an interpreter at your IEP, ITP meeting. You want to make sure you let them know ahead of time if the document, the ITP needs to be translated, because this is all very time consuming. And the district will have to share people to so the more advance notice you can give for these meetings to have these supports there would be very helpful. You want to let the school know who will be writing up and actually documenting the IEP. And if you would want them not just to be at the computer typing and nodding their head, you would want that member to actually read what they're typing so you could follow along. And you want to make sure you encourage your adolescent to participate in the IEP. This is a really important step as they get older, because mom or dad isn't going to be around to advocate for them necessarily. So it's really good practice to have the student at the high school age speak up in terms of what their needs are, or what's important to them, or what they like to do, or what they're having difficulty with. Which a lot of students are really shy about doing that, or they feel like it's the teacher, I can't tell the teacher what to do. But these particular meetings, the IEP meetings, individual meetings, are for that individual, and we want to get them participating and saying their needs. It's also really good practice for a job, right? The student has to, or the individual has to ask questions if they don't understand. They have to ask clarifying questions of the supervisor. So this is a really good way for them to get practice. Next. Helpful tips. Oh, okay. You want to, Fabian talked about this a little bit in the IEP document. The last part of the IEP or the ITP is called the FAPE offer, free and appropriate public education. Part of that FAPE offer is a list of the accommodations a student would need. And it's very important that the student and the team and the family get familiar with what these accommodations are. Would they need, besides information in their own language, would they need extra checklists? Would they need things printed for them? Would they need to, like we said, have an interpreter? So this is a part of the IEP. It's on the accommodation piece right before they usually write what the services are. So it's a very important aspect. If they need extra time to take tests, that's written there. If they need an extra area, if the testing area is too noisy, that could be written there as well. So all these things are very important for the student to become, and the family to become aware of. Next. Helpful tips. Okay. The other thing that's an important part of your team member would be the Department of Rehabilitation, or DOR. It's a vocational process. The DOR rep community, it's a community resource, and the rep can actually help you help the individual get exposure to jobs, prepare for jobs, actually coach on the job and train on the job. So that's something that's a referral process for the IEP. And that's something that's very important to request that your DOR representative come to that IEP meeting. Another really important person to come if you're with the regional center, and we're with Westside Regional Center, so we know it's very important at the transition planning meetings to have your regional center representative with you. They know a lot about what other options are available after school in terms of employment options. Regional centers have many different providers that actually will train the individual on a job and help them find a job and be a job coach. So it's something that you need to talk with your service coordinator about. Like I said, that transition planning process, you should be thinking about what your strengths are, what your needs are, what you see yourself doing after high school, and work with your service coordinator so they can help you identify opportunities after the IEP, which can include um, actual employment or training for employment or day of programs to help you get ready and learn these skills so you can get a job and actually help find a job for you. The other support service that Westside has is our team, our education support team. Our education support services, we actually are advocates and can attend the IEP with you and can help facilitate that these questions are answers and that your needs are met, or if there's an area of need that needs an assessment, we can help you request that assessment and explain that process to you. So along with your service coordinator, you want to make sure you ask your service coordinator about Westside's education support services. So with that, I think we're turning it over to Fabian.
Transition planning is a process that's going to take, it's going to need assessment, updating of goals, creating of goals throughout the high school career of the student. We're gonna kind of trying to break down grade by grade to kind of help you understand some of the small steps that you can take to support your child for every grade year. Next. So in the 9th grade, the student is coming out of middle school. A lot of things are changing. It's brand new. It's a lot going on. So besides navigating high school, the students should be working on, what happens after high school and what are the plans for the students after high school. So there are small steps that we can take to prepare our students for what's going to come after high school. We can start by talking about our students, about what they would like to see for their lives after they exit out of high school, things that they're interested in, what kind of work would they like to do, what kind of school would they like to attend, things like that. Also, encouraging our students and teaching our students about their disability and how it affects their learning and their social engagements and things in their environment. That's very important. We want our students to be ready to understand themselves before they leave high school, because this is a very important time that we have to be able to get them ready for life after high school and to be able to live independently. Next. And working in this skills, we have to make sure that teaching them what about their disability, knowing how their disability affects them. We also have to teach them how to speak up and be able to request for what they need and advocate for themselves. When children are going to be out of high school, some of the support may go away, and they might not have the full support that they're having around IEP and ITPs. So we want to make sure that they know exactly what they can do, what they're allowed to do, and how they can be supported in terms of being able to accomplish their goals. Encouraging them to go attend transition fairs to gather information to kind of acclimate themselves in terms of what's available, what's out there for me to do, and also engage with other people and service providers and ask questions. That's very important. Next. Ninth grade is also, or should also be the time that families can sit down with their students and really consider and think about what route the child is going to take throughout their high school. Like Barb mentioned earlier, there's alternative curriculum which would allow the child to leave out of high school with a certificate of completion. And there's also the core curriculum, which allows the child to exit out of high school with a high school diploma. To really think about the child's skills, what are they able to do, what are their challenges, and what they can accomplish is very important. Making this decision is very significant. The two avenues are very different from each other. And what the student would be able to do with them can also be very different in terms of after high school life. So we have to really carefully understand our the child's abilities and the challenges and be able to determine. There's a lot of assessment the school district will do to help us figure that out. But in some cases, it could be very ambiguous, or it could be very frustrating for families. So just understanding your students' abilities and wanting, goals after high school can clarify some of this, ambiguity. So for alternative curriculum and certificate of completion, students would normally have challenges in terms of accessing the regular core curriculum. So if they're not able to successfully complete a core curriculum, and that curriculum must be modified for the student to be able to access it, that would not count for credit. So that would mean that the child, even with accommodations and IEP support, is not able to successfully complete it without having to modify it. So maybe the alternative curriculum is probably a route to take. Sometimes pushing students to, pursue avenues that are very challenging to them can lead into frustration and loss of interest in terms of their education. So we have to really be very careful and also involve our students in making this decision and kind of clarify and answer all the questions they need to answer that they have to make sure that they are in the right curriculum. For the core curriculum, there are accommodations available for the student, but not modifications. So the student is still expected to fulfill all the requirements for graduation based on either the minimum requirements set up by the specific state, or the graduation requirements set out by the local district. Some students are able to access the core curriculum, but at a slower pace. So there are different avenues that we can take to support those students. Next. So in the 10th grade, we should really start taking the transition planning seriously. We have to start requesting for assessment if the school doesn't already started on their own. So this assessment includes looking at the child's, gathering information about the child and looking at the child's interests, skills, what are the challenges the student is facing, and also assessment of independent living skills. These are information gathered from the teacher, the student's teacher, from the family, the student's family, and also the student themselves. Next. So by 10th grade, ensure that your child has a transition plan. The school should initiate these transition plans before the child turns 16. However, as a parent, you can request for them for the transition planning to start at an earlier age, as early as age of 14. And these transition planning should have really good transition goals that is created around and um, the interest and the child's goals towards completing high school. So that can include post secondary education, job, employment, or independent living skills, but they should have specific goals that are very SMART goals, and it should also include how the child is going to be supported in terms of being able to achieve these goals. Next. In 10th grade, it's also if the child is following the core curriculum or the high school diploma track, it's also a time where students are starting to take state examinations and other examinations that allows them to enter college. PSAT, SAT, and things like that will come up in the 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. So those are the times that we really have to sit down and think for those children who are going to be exiting out of high school diploma. Are they looking to go to a 4-year college, or is it a 2-year college? So even making a decision about where they're going to go to college would allow us to either take the exams or not need the exams. If the child is going to a 2-year college, there's a chance that they might not need the SAT and the ACT scores to be able to go to a 2-year college. So that's maybe we can invest that time that student is going to put on that and preparing to take these exams and do something else more productive. So having a conversation with our students as to what their plans are after high school would help us do this. Next. There are also fee waivers and things like that to pay for the SATs and ACT examinations depending on the family's income. So those are things that the child and family can talk about with the school counselor. Making sure that our student is on track is very important. Having an inventory of classes that the child is already taken in the 9th grade, is taken now in 10th grade, and what are the required courses that the child must complete before graduating high school. Looking at those and kind of seeing where the child is in their progress in terms of meeting those requirements would allow us to kind of plan and see what route and what support we should be giving the student. Not only the student should be working on what courses they've successfully completed, and what courses they should be completing. They also should be working on specific goals that are on the IEP to ensure that they're able to meet their goals in terms of being an independent person prior to leaving high school. Next. So make sure, and this should take place every year, make sure that you update all the accommodations, you go through all the accommodations that your students receiving to see if the accommodations are working, if there's a need to add more accommodations, that should be looked at. So every year we should be thinking about that, but especially in 10th grade, we should definitely kind of go over all the accommodations, make sure we input the new accommodations that are needed, because we want to make sure that we set the child for success. Also, encouraging our students to do volunteer work, or even have a part-time job is really great opportunity for students to learn um, outside of the school. Volunteering would allow them to have on-the-job experience, to have people skills and things like that, social skills, be able to meet people and kind of, see what the real life work experience would look like. So given those opportunities to our students is very important. Next. For the alternative curriculum for the children who are leaving high school with a certificate of completion, a lot of the focus is going to be on functional skills. So language art can be, reading symbols, recognizing symbols outside in the community. Making sure that we stop at a red light. How do you go inside the store? How do you greet people? Things like that. Very functional skills. Being able to read instructions and things like that. So those are the things that they would be working on to be able to have those independent skills. Next. Math skills would include telling time, being able to count money, being able to purchase things, balancing a checkbook, being able to even budget. So volume, measuring, things like that can be included in the math skills. Next. In 11th grade, for the students in the core curriculum, they should be really, really focused on now exactly what it is that they want to do. They should be identifying a set of careers they want to pursue, what kind of education they would like to pursue and plan for that. Going on college visits. Right now, due to COVID, a lot of the go on those virtual visits from your home. Also, making sure that you familiarize yourself or your student familiarize themselves about the supports that they can be getting in those schools. Next. And also, what are the admission requirements? What would it take for me to get into that school? Would they be requiring me to take the SATs and the ACTs? Would I need it? Would I have to get certain scores? So if if the child doesn't have the necessary requirements that the schools would require for enrollment or being able to accept the child, maybe there is a different route that we can take. So those conversations should be taking place with the student. Counselors can get involved. Maybe you should be able to invite the school counselor to the IEP meeting to discuss these things. Learning about the costs associated with the training and education options, also very important. A regional center is not going to be able to support or pay for those costs. So what are the available resources? Financial aid, what are the requirements? What forms need to be filled out? All those questions should be answered by the school counselor. That is why it's important to invite the counselor into the IEP meeting. Also learn about available support services in colleges. Disabled Student Services is what offers the services for disabled students in colleges. It's very different from high school and grade school. The students are expected to be independent. They're expected to request their accommodations. So it looks a lot different. So visiting those centers and kind of familiarizing yourself and your student with what would be expected from the student is very helpful. Practice advocacy skills to access services, and not only to access services, to be able to engage with professors and students and, other people around the school. We have to make sure that our students are able to advocate for themselves before they leave us. Independent living skills. Some kids are going to want to live on campus and colleges. So, what are things that you need to know to be able to live with other people? Keeping your room clean, make sure your hygiene is good, and different things. Being able to cook for yourself if the cafeteria is closed, things like that. So we have to be able to teach these skills before the child leaves home. Also, transportation. How do you get around? Do you need a bus pass? Do you know how to drive? Depending on the child's skills, we should be working on these things. Social skills is very important. Kids in college would have to live with roommates sometimes. They have to engage with, their professors and things like that. So working on what's appropriate social skill behavior when we're dealing with other individuals, and allowing our students to kind of strengthen their skills before they leave the high school is very important. Next. Also getting on board with Department of Rehabilitation and inviting them to the IEP, making sure the Department of Rehab rep is always part of the child's IEP, make sure they are involved and offering support for the student, very important. We also want to make sure that the student knows what the Department of Rehabilitation is able to do for that student, because there's a lot that Department of Rehabilitation can offer our students. They can work on interview skills, they can offer paid internship, and they can even sometimes cover some of the costs towards the child's education after high school. So it's very important that we familiarize ourselves with Department of Rehabilitation and what services they can offer our students. Also, this is a time we should really encourage our students to kind of pinpoint a career path they want to take and kind of narrow down their interests. And it should be based on their strength. We should encourage them to look into careers that will really kind of bring out a lot of their talents. So we can kind of have the conversation around that. Next. So in the 11th grade, for the students in alternative curriculum or certificate of completion, they would still be doing a lot of the functional curriculum, functional skills. But we should still talk to our students about, what kind of living arrangements would you like once you exit out of high school, after high school? What would you like to do? How would you like to live? Where would you like to live? And also help them be as independent as they can, because if they want to live outside of the home, they are, they would have to do a lot of things independently and be able to complete certain tasks to be able to successfully, realize their dreams. So we want to make sure that we support them as much as we can and allow them to practice on their independent skills. Next. So make sure that your child, for the 12th grade and core curriculum, this is the last year that they're going to have in high school. So make sure that they have all the required classes. They're not missing any classes. If they're missing classes, then they have to that they have to meet based on the requirements. How are we going to potentially allow them to do that? So we have to make sure that we meet earlier in the year to kind of plan out the year to make sure that the student is able to complete high school on a timely manner. It's also important to make sure that we know the graduation dates and the student is fully participating in the activities that's before the graduation ceremony and after graduation ceremony. We want to make sure that they really are included in all the activities for the senior year. Next. So when the child leaves high school with a high school diploma, the educational relationship between the district and the individual stops right there. So they're no longer going to belong to the school district. They're not going to get their educational services through the school district. So it's important to familiarize ourselves with the regional center support and also Department of Rehabilitation support, and kind of make sure that we know what are the services that are available for them. Next. This is a team effort, supporting our students is a team effort. Make sure that you include the IEP team in all the communication that you're gonna have. Just let them know that what's going on and updates information as it comes in. So to make sure that the student completes their requirements successfully. Make sure before exiting high school that there is a summary of performance completed. This would have a list of strengths, things that the child can do, the challenges that they have, and things like that. It has, a variety of information that the post-secondary school can use to accommodate the child. So ensuring that you have the proper documentation, make sure that your IEP is completed and the child is released appropriately is important, and make sure you save all your documentation, because the post-secondary schools, the colleges, they would need to see some of those documentations they will request for them. Next. Encourage, your student to have a job, to, practice their interview skills, to kind of work on their resumes and things like that. Those are skills that they can use while in college, after college, and stuff like that. So, before they leave out of high school, when you are there right there to support them, and when there is a team of people are able to support them, these are the things that they should be working on. Also, visiting employment services and other services that are available, and kind of exposing their students to what's available for them after they exit out of high school would be a really good idea. Yeah, like I said, building a resume, kind of, they can actually, that can be included in their transition planning, working on a resume, figuring out what to put on there and things like that. And those are things that they can work towards, depending on the child's ability and what they're capable of doing. We can definitely support them in that. Next. So this is 12th grade, like I said, is most likely the last year, unless the child is taking a 5th year of high school to complete the required courses. So this is the time we kind of finalize what we've been working on all these years, and from the IFSPs all the way to the IEPs and the transition planning. It was all done to ensure that the child is going to successfully transition to adulthood, and this is the time that we're going to realize that reality. So this is also the time that we, depending on the child's choices, where we kind of can start considering, like, what is feasible in terms of cost. and how can we be able to afford that, and so kind of having that conversation regarding cost of living arrangements is also another important aspect at this stage in high school. Next. So Barb is going to talk about what comes after high school.
Okay, so post-graduation. So Fabian talked a lot about getting ready and having information. What's very important is that how you organize your information. So I want to make sure that you are keeping a file together, that you're keeping a file with the assessments that have been conducted, with the IEPs that have been conducted, because this information is what you, as she shared, you're going to be sharing with your exploring post-secondary education. You want to be able to have that information to share with the disabled service counselor. It's also important that you communicate with your team. Even though you might be on the alternative curriculum, the student can still do that walk across the graduation stage and receive the diploma. They still will continue in the transition program, but many times students are taking not only their core curriculum or alternative curriculum classes, but they're also doing some mainstreaming with typical kids and taking the core curriculum as well, maybe with modifications. But the point is, they're part of that community. They're part of that school peer with those peers and friends. So you would want to make sure that you're talking ahead of time. You don't do this the week before graduation. You would call your transition meeting. You would talk about it a good 3, 4, 6 months ahead of time, that this is the expectation that you have. So arrangements can be made for the student participate in all the senior activities, graduation, grad night, what, of course, it's such a different world now with the pandemic, but you want to make sure that they're participating. Okay, next. So education beyond high school. As Fabian mentioned before, for exploring community college, there is a disabled student services that you would want to connect up there. You would want to have your information. They're not going to follow necessarily, and they're not going to develop an IEP for you, but they will work with the professors and state the accommodations and list the accommodations that the student needs in order to get meaningful participation out of the classes. And these accommodations could be, like we talked about, written documents, reports, extra time on tests, maybe things broken down. So there's a lot of accommodations that you can review, and we have them in our transition to high school. I'll talk more about that. You also want to have the student, and again, this is not something you do the week before you graduate. You would want to have the student explore the community colleges, visit the campus, visit the college campus before, so they know ahead of time what's involved. There might even be some regional center services available to the student in terms of negotiating the campus, not to do with any of the academics or the classes or an aide in the class, but to help negotiate the campus. Where's the student store? Where are the buildings? Usually they're very complicated. So there is a little bit of a regional center piece that can be part of the students' support on the college campus. Next. So here we have our team, including Sandy, has worked very hard to pull together education beyond high school document. This has in-depth checklists, what documentation is required, how to access your disabled student services at the community campus, And so ask your service coordinator for this booklet, or you can, Family Resource Center has the booklet, and it's also online. So we worked very hard to condense everything in one place. And so it's a really good resource to have. And I would want you to look at it while you're in high school, while you're in ninth grade, 10th grade, because it has a lot of information, the step-by-steps, as Fabian talked about, to help you prepare. And again, remember that you're organizing your information, you're having it coordinated in a file by year and by assessments, so it's easy to access. Next. So like I mentioned, Westside Regional Center does support and assist in navigating post-education, also navigating the campus if necessary. So you would want to talk with your service coordinator, and you would want to do it, a good quarter, before, not a week before, the good 2-3 months before you're exiting high school. A couple reasons. One, you would want to make sure Regional Center knows what's going on. Two, if you wanted to explore any of our adult service provider programs, that's another whole area that I understand we'll be doing a presentation on, are the different employment providers and adult services that Westside has available to families. But you need to start planning this a good 3, 4, 6 months ahead of the student graduating. A lot of our most popular programs have waiting lists, so you want to make sure you explore and get on a waiting list. And you also want to make sure you're connecting with your Department of Rehab counselor. The DOR counselor will be staying with you after the high school education experience. They're available for job training and for students that are at the college level. So if you're continuing in public education after completing high school, as we talked about, there are transition programs that the school district provides. Sometimes it's the same teacher, sometimes it's a different teacher. And they work primarily on these transition skills, working in the community, participating in the community, those functional skills, purchasing in the community, how to practice job interviews, helping the individual prepare their employment application and resume. So this is something that, again, you want to make sure that you understand is part and parcel of what the IEP team or the transition team can do. And you want to be able to mention it to them, so there's plenty of time to do. The other thing, the community-based instruction, that's when we are practicing our jobs and our functional skills in the community. It's called community-based instruction. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's half of the school day when the individual is still on the school campus or the transition campus, and then they go in the community and practice these community-based instruction, which are independent living skills, employment readiness, and some even work opportunities where the teacher is the job coach and works with the employer, and then we develop the goals that the student is specifically working on in order to be a good employee. So even though if you're on the alternative curriculum, as I mentioned before, you're eligible for these support services from the school district till the age 22. So it's usually by school year. So if you're turning 22 in December, then you're gonna access school that starts at the beginning of till the beginning of oh, I just got a phone call, got distracted. So the beginning of the opportunity, you want to start practicing uh, before school runs out. The other thing you want to make sure you have this discussion. Are we going to be on the alternative curriculum? Some students start on the core curriculum, and then if things are tough or it's not really going very well, you might have an IEP at 11th grade that switches you to the alternative curriculum. It's a process that's done. It includes assessments. There are timelines with assessments. It's usually a 60-day timeline. That's why we keep on reminding you to do this, look at this sooner than later. Most employment assessments, transition assessments, are all assessments under IDEA is a 60-day timeline. So once the assessment is completed, you sit down with your team and you talk about the outcome of the assessment and what the next steps will be. Okay, next is a thank you. So please check in with your service coordinator. Westside Regional Center also has a whole nother community service department that we work with providers, that work with our individuals after they are exiting the school program. So that's another reason to be very well connected with your service coordinator, because you could explore some of those programs while your student is still within those last few months of school. You also would want to know that we have an education support service department and advocacy framework that can help you with your IEP process. It can help you understand it. We can actually attend the IEPs with you. And the other area that we work really strongly in is we develop interagency relationships with our school districts. So if there's a problem or they have a question, we've got each other's phone numbers and we know each other, that we can call up and often do much of the collaboration and problem solving over the phone. So if we have a lot of new service coordinators at Westside that might not be so familiar with our education support services, but I want you to be. And you can call us directly. You can use our 4000 number that's listed here on the slide and ask for education support services. And there's 3 of us on our team. You've met myself and Fabian, and we have Ron Lopez, who was our Spanish speaking representative for education support services. So with that, I think I hope to hear from you and hope you've got your questions answered. And if not, please feel free to call us at Westside Regional Center. Thank you.